Cognitive shortcut of immediate recall. The simplest psychological tendencies to succumb to as they mimic intuitive logic. Imagine this. You're preparing to enter an aircraft when you abruptly recall recent media coverage of a flight disaster. Your pulse quickens. Air travel now seems perilous, even though mathematically it's far less hazardous than commuting by road. Conversely, you rarely hesitate before riding in a vehicle, despite automobile collisions resulting in numerous fatalities daily. This demonstrates the cognitive shortcut of immediate recall and action, a mental process where we assess probability based on how effortlessly we remember comparable instances. If information surfaces swiftly in memory, e.g., a predator attack, a brutal offense, or an unexpected windfall, we presume it occurs more frequently than reality. Our minds are structured for speed, so rather than scrutinizing data, we depend on the most mentally accessible examples. This tendency explains why individuals inflate risks tied to uncommon but sensational occurrences. News outlets capitalize on this, saturating audiences with tales of abductions, catastrophic weather, or bizarre incidents, events that dominate coverage because they're extraordinary. In contrast, gradual, imperceptible threats that cause more deaths, e.g., cardiovascular ailments or environmental contamination, seem less pressing as they linger less vividly in memory. The immediate recall bias doesn't just mold anxieties, it sways monetary choices, societal viewpoints, and more. If you repeatedly encounter warnings about fiscal crises, you might presume economic health is poorer than verified statistics indicate. If a handful of users voice dissatisfaction with an item, you could deem it defective despite overwhelming approval from others. To counter this bias, challenge instinctive responses. When an idea feels self-evident or prevalent, pause and reflect. Is this accurate or merely memorable? Occasionally, the most alarming scenarios aren't the deadliest. They're simply the most frequently discussed. Cognitive anchoring effect. This subtle mental influence operates covertly because we seldom notice its impact. Visualize this. You enter a retail shop seeking a fresh coat. The initial item displayed carries a 500 tag. Whoa, that's steep, you conclude. Unnoticed adoption procedure. 500 tag. Whoa, that's steep, you conclude. Then, unnoticed adoption procedure 250. Abruptly, it appears reasonably priced, prompting a purchase. Yet, consider this. Had you encountered the 250 coat initially, you might have deemed it costly. 250 coat initially, you might have deemed it costly. The 500 figure wasn't merely a value, it acted as a mental benchmark, distorting your judgment of affordability. The cognitive anchoring effect describes our inclination to depend excessively on the earliest data encountered during choices. That starting value, be it monetary, numerical, or arbitrary, establishes a mental baseline, swaying subsequent evaluations. Automobile vendors exploit this tactic routinely. They showcase premium models first, rendering mid-tier options comparatively affordable. Wage discussions mirror this dynamic. The opening figure in talks often drags outcomes toward itself. In a peculiar study by psychologists Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman, subjects spun a wheel arbitrarily stopping at 10 or 65, then guessed the proportion of UN member states from Africa. Those landing on 65 proposed far higher estimates than those landing on 10. The wheel's result was irrelevant, yet participants subconsciously clung to the initial digit as a guide. Alarmingly, this effect sways professionals too. Magistrates assign stricter penalties after viewing elevated sentencing suggestions. Property evaluators appraise homes inconsistently based on initial listed prices. Once an anchor embeds itself, resisting its sway proves challenging. To combat this bias, interrogate snap judgments. Before finalizing a choice, reflect. Am I analyzing objectively, or am I fixated on the first value presented? Often, reality isn't defined by intrinsic worth, It's molded by the reference point implanted in your mind. Influence of presentation framework. This phenomenon illustrates that how information is worded shapes perspectives as crucially as, or more than, factual substance. Suppose you require an operation, and your physician states, this procedure has a 90% success likelihood. That feels comforting, yes? Now, envision them phrasing it as, this carries a 10% mortality risk. Instantly, the identical intervention seems daunting, despite unchanged medical realities. The influence of presentation framework refers to a mental distortion where choices shift based on how data is contextualized rather than its essence. Identical scenarios provoke divergent reactions depending on optimistic versus pessimistic framing. Advertisers, policymakers, and journalists exploit this tactic to manipulate opinions covertly. Consider supermarkets. Shoppers favor ground beef branded 85% muscle composition over 15% lipid content, though both describe the same product. A leader might announce joblessness has plunged to 5% optimistic or countless citizens lack work pessimistic, identical data, contrasting impressions. In a pivotal experiment by psychologists Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, subjects selected between two therapies for a lethal illness. One emphasized potential survivors as gain-focused, the other potential fatalities loss-focused. Despite identical outcomes, respondents heavily favored the survival-framed option. Our brains exhibit neurological aversion to deficits, instinctively preferring options framed as safeguards, even when logic equates them. This framework sway permeates investments, societal debates, and interpersonal dynamics. When encountering statistics, claims, or advertisements, pause and probe. Am I responding to substance or stylistic delivery? Occasionally, the distinction between favorable and unfavorable hinges not on truth but linguistic packaging. Retrospective certainty illusion, the explanation for why occurrences feel inevitable post fact. Reflect on a recent major occurrence, a corporate collapse, a public figure's controversy, or a pivotal sports defeat. In reflection, you may assert, I foresaw this outcome. But did you truly? Or does hindsight's clarity distort recollection? This illusion, termed the predetermined outcome fallacy, describes our propensity to perceive resolved events as more foreseeable than they were initially. Once aware of conclusions, our minds reconstruct narratives, fostering false confidence in prior foresight, even when absent. This mental sleight proves so potent that we sincerely persuade ourselves we always possess the solution. Post-catastrophic financial market downturn, commentators emphasize glaring precursors, indicators largely dismissed pre-collapse. Athletic supporters insist they always doubted their squad's victory, despite fervent optimism preceding the match. This distortion explains why dissolved partnerships, commercial missteps, and electoral results appear self-evident retroactively. If truly obvious, why weren't precautions taken? Psychologists Barak Fishoff and Ruth Bates showcased this in a seminal experiment. Subjects estimated potential consequences of Richard Nixon's 1972 diplomatic visit to China. Upon learning factual results, they inaccurately recalled initial forecasts, inflating their predictive accuracy. This illusion doesn't merely warp memory, it obliterates ambiguity, casting resolved events as inescapable. Its peril lies in fostering excessive assurance in forecasting capacities. It deceives us into assuming superior world comprehension, breeding suboptimal choices, and hindered error-based growth. Reality? Existence brims with unpredictability, yet our cognition craves orderly narratives where chaos masquerades as destiny. Mental prototype reliance. Picture this. You encounter a reserved, literature-obsessed individual with spectacles who adores verse. Is his occupation more probable to be an archivist or an agriculturalist? If aligned with the majority, you'd lean toward archivist. Yet, consider this. Globally, agriculturalists vastly outnumber archivists, making the latter statistically less plausible. This error epitomizes the mental prototype reliance, a cognitive shortcut where likelihood is assessed by alignment with preconceived archetypes rather than factual odds. Our minds crave familiarity, clustering concepts by perceived resemblances. If traits align with a known category, we assign membership instinctively, neglecting broader context. This breeds impulsive conclusions that feel accurate but frequently err. For instance, learning of a tech entrepreneur in casual attire who abandoned academia might trigger assumptions of becoming the next industry titan. Yet most ventures flounder, and most academic departures don't yield fortunes. Archetypes deceive us into dismissing probabilities. In a pivotal study by psychologists Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman, subjects read a profile of Linda, a vocal advocate for equity and justice. They then chose whether she was likelier to be A, a financial clerk, or B, a financial clerk and a gender equality advocate. Most selected B, despite its reduced statistical plausibility. Why? Feminist activism aligned with their mental prototype of Linda, overriding logical deduction that A alone is likelier. This heuristic molds recruitment choices, legal rulings, and trust assessments. When evaluating others, pause and reflect. Am I grounding this in evidence or perceived alignment? Occasionally, intuition guides us not to truth, but to the most familiar narrative. Glow of singular perception. Why do we presume individuals with appealing appearances possess greater intellect, empathy, or skill, even absent proof? Reflect on a revered public figure. Perhaps they're captivating during public appearances, stylishly attired and articulate. Now ponder. Do you also infer they're morally upright, leadership material, or inherently wise? If so, you've succumbed to the glow of singular perception, a cognitive illusion where one favorable attribute warps holistic judgment. This phenomenon drives us to subconsciously link attractiveness, poise, or social standing to unrelated virtues like honesty, acumen, or reliability. This explains why polished, articulate job seekers often outrank equally qualified but less polished rivals. It clarifies why a magnetic statesman might appear more credible than a plain-spoken counterpart. It's also why educators frequently equate compliant pupils with higher intellect, even when academic performance contradicts this. In a landmark experiment by psychologist Edward Thorndike, military superiors assessed troops' capabilities. Soldiers with athletic physiques received inflated ratings, even in domains unrelated to fitness, like intellectual capacity or command aptitude. Officers didn't consciously bias their evaluations. Their minds extrapolated from a single striking trait. This perceptual glow sways recruitment, romantic attraction, and legal outcomes. We conflate appearing competent with being competent, often obliviously. When captivated by someone's charisma, aesthetics, or self-assurance, pause and probe. Am I evaluating holistically or fixating on a superficial radiance? Occasionally, surface brilliance obscures deeper truths. Shadow of singular judgment. Suppose a stranger's grip feels limp, their speech carries an unusual pitch, or their attire appears creased. Before they utter a complete thought, you've already concluded, I distrust this individual. This exemplifies the shadow of singular judgment, a cognitive distortion where one unfavorable characteristic, however trivial, disproportionately skews holistic assessment. This bias acts as the sinister counterpart to the glow of singular perception. Just as we link charm or polish to competence, we instinctively tie flaws, like an unkempt look, anxious disposition, or ill-fated name, to diminished ability or integrity. A solitary negative impression seeps like ink, tainting subsequent evaluations. This prejudice manifests ubiquitously. During hiring reviews, applicants who falter during initial responses risk being deemed unfit, despite stellar credentials. In classrooms, educators interpret labeled disruptors' missteps as deliberate defiance, while favored pupils receive leniency. Legal research reveals jurors disproportionately penalize accused individuals with unreliable aesthetics, harsh expressions, slouched posture, or visible body art, irrespective of factual proof. The shadow's potency lies in obscuring objectivity. We believe ourselves logical, yet we're often puppeteered by primal snap judgments. When tempted to hastily dismiss someone, interrogate, am I assessing the individual or surrendering to my preconceptions? Occasionally, the flaw resides not in them, but in our distorted lens. Selective attention distortion. Would relocating to a sun-drenched coastal city guarantee greater joy? Many would affirm, after all, who'd choose gridlock and dreary skies over tropical landscapes and salty air. Yet research indicates individuals migrating to these idealized destinations rarely sustain heightened contentment long term. This stems from selective attention distortion, a cognitive quirk where we disproportionately prioritize one variable while neglecting the myriad nuances shaping an experience. This distortion fuels the illusion that solitary elements, ideal climate, elevated income, or elite education will radically elevate well-being. We hyperfocus on that singular trait, presuming it singularly governs fulfillment. Reality, however, blends endless components. No lone factor dictates emotional states. Certainly, coastal relocation seems idyllic, but will it dissolve routine anxieties? Transform relational dynamics, wellness, or existential purpose? Unlikely. This bias permeates daily choices. Purchasing vehicles. We fixate on fuel efficiency yet overlook ergonomic design. Selecting careers. We prioritize remuneration while dismissing personal professional equilibrium. In romance, we idolize aesthetics or status, sidelining emotional alignment. The peril lies in its capacity to bait us into myopic choices. We persuade ourselves one glittering detail will unlock joy, only to later grasp life's intricate tapestry. Before anchoring aspirations to a solitary factor, interrogate. Am I perceiving comprehensively or fixating on the loudest signal? Occasionally, fulfillment hinges not on visible factors, but on unnoticed subtleties. Emotional impulse shortcut. You're in a grocery aisle, choosing between two peanut butter jars. The first has a sleek, contemporary container with minimalist graphics. The second appears dated with muted hues and a lackluster sticker. Without deliberation, you select the former. Why? Intuitively, it feels superior. This demonstrates the emotional impulse shortcut, an instinctive judgment mechanism where sentiments steer choices over rationality or data. This shortcut explains why we reflexively trust individuals with approachable grins. Equate premium goods with excellence. Avoid perilous sounding phenomena despite statistical safety. Our minds prioritize expediency, bypassing analytical rigor in favor of instinctive reactions. If an option sparks joy or comfort, we deem it beneficial, secure, or worthwhile. If it provokes unease or aversion, we label it hazardous, unreliable, or inferior. Advertisers exploit this relentlessly. Political campaigns emphasize fear-mongering or idolization over platform specifics. Processed snack ads depict vibrant households relishing meals, not nutritional content. Luxury brands leverage aesthetics to imply superiority without functional justification. Even court systems aren't immune. Empirical studies indicate penitent-seeming offenders often receive lighter penalties than stoic counterparts, irrespective of case merits. The peril? This shortcut breeds flawed reasoning. We might reject sound guidance due to personal dislike or trivialize genuine threats because they lack visceral dread. Before finalizing a choice, probe, am I reasoning or emoting? Occasionally, cognitive autopilot derails discernment. Recognition-driven bias. Have you questioned why you consistently select identical dishes at your preferred eatery despite numerous alternatives? This isn't due to objective superiority, but rather repeated exposure. This exemplifies the recognition-driven bias. a cognitive shortcut prioritizing known entities over unknowns, even if novel alternatives offer advantages. This tendency clarifies why individuals gravitate toward recognized brands despite potential inferiority. It underpins our automatic trust in recognizable individuals and the perceived catchiness of frequently heard melodies. Recurrence breeds ease, and ease deceives us into equating prior exposure with inherent value. While this bias streamlines choices by reducing deliberation, it risks irrational conclusions. For instance, research reveals repeated exposure to false claims increases belief in them, even with awareness of their inaccuracy. Essentially, frequency amplifies perceived legitimacy, irrespective of factual basis. This inclination extends to social bonds. Routine encounters with peers, colleagues, or public figures foster affinity, not through merit but mere repetition-induced trust. The hazard lies in complacency, clinging to the known while neglecting potential growth avenues. When habitually opting for familiarity, pause and reflect. Is this optimal or merely recognizable? Mind-body healing illusion. Suppose you ingest a tablet to alleviate cranial discomfort, only to later discover it contained nothing but a sucrose-based capsule. Yet, inexplicably, your pain subsided. How? Enter the mind-body healing illusion, one of psychology's most bewildering yet potent phenomena. This illusion occurs when individuals manifest tangible health improvements solely through conviction in a therapy's efficacy, despite receiving inert interventions. Beyond mere optimism, empirical research confirms the brain secretes natural analgesics and neurotransmitters linked to reward, e.g., endorphins, dopamine in response to such beliefs, mitigating discomfort and enhancing well-being. Clinicians document this across contexts: pain management, mood disorders, even physical performance enhancement. In one trial, competitors injected with a sterile saltwater solution, misrepresented as an ergogenic compound, exhibited measurable gains in power and stamina. Their faith in the treatment duped their physiology into surpassing baseline limits. Yet this illusion carries risks. Patients may forsake evidence-based care for sham remedies. Ethical dilemmas arise. Is it permissible for clinicians to administer inert substances if benefits outweigh deceit? Most intriguingly, this phenomenon exposes psychology's sway over physiology. If expectation alone can heal, to what degree does anticipation sculpt our reality? It underscores the mind's latent power to transcend assumed boundaries. When symptom relief follows medication, ponder: was this biochemical intervention or self-induced restoration? Adverse expectation phenomenon. Imagine visiting a physician who cautions that a specific drug could induce stomach discomfort. The following day, you experience queasiness, except there's a twist. You never ingested the drug. What you endured is termed the adverse expectation phenomenon, the inverse counterpart of the mind-body healing illusion. While the latter convinces the mind of improvement, the former instills belief in harm where none exists. In research, subjects informed that a benign procedure might provoke cephalalgia reported heightened headache frequency compared to uninformed peers. The intervention itself caused no harm, anticipation of distress did. This phenomenon dominates clinical contexts. Patients excessively cautioned about adverse reactions sometimes manifest them purely through dread. In rare instances, individuals perish from perceived terminal diagnoses later proven false. The mind's capacity to hijack bodily functions is staggering. Beyond medicine, this bias permeates daily existence. Assuming overtime work guarantees exhaustion may induce fatigue despite adequate rest. Presuming a food item will sicken you might trigger nausea pre-consumption. Expectations don't merely distort reality, they forge it. When encountering warnings about hypothetical risks, superstitions, or rumors of danger, challenge: is this factual or self-fulfilling prophecy? Occasionally, fearing catastrophe summons it. Universal validation fallacy. In lieu of personalized evaluations, Every learner receives identical remarks. You possess robust analytical reasoning capacities, but occasionally doubt your instincts. Your prose captivates, though structural refinement remains possible. Persistent effort and remarkable accomplishments await. Most pupils nod, convinced the instructor has deeply assessed their aptitudes and flaws. Unbeknownst to them, this critique wasn't customized. It was a universally applicable declaration crafted to mimic individuality. This exemplifies the universal validation fallacy. Individuals accepting ambiguous, sweeping assertions as profoundly precise and relevant to their circumstances. This fallacy stems from our cognition's innate reflex to interpret ambiguous assertions as individualized, even when universally fitting. Psychologist Bertram Forer illustrated this by distributing a tailored character analysis to students post-assessment. Crucially, all received identical generic summaries, yet nearly all deemed them strikingly precise. This distortion permeates temperament assessments, workplace appraisals, and even clinical self-evaluations. When confronted with ostensibly profound insights, we neglect to question, is this genuinely about me or applicable to most? It underscores that not all counsel is as bespoke as perceived. We merely delude ourselves into believing it is. Absolutely. Here's a full rephrasing of your script, keeping every idea intact but reworded entirely. I've also changed the heading as requested. The illusion of personal insight. You walk into Madame Celeste's dimly lit room. She gazes at you with piercing eyes and begins to speak. She tells you that while you can be sociable, you also value your alone time. You dream big, yet sometimes feel like your own obstacles hold you back. She says others might not always recognize the depth of your emotions, but within you lies unwavering loyalty. You're stunned. How could she know all this about you? The truth? She doesn't. She's simply an expert in crafting phrases that sound deeply personal, but are actually true for most people. This psychological phenomenon is known as the Barnum effect, named after P.T. Barnum, the famous entertainer who once declared, "There's a sucker born every minute." The trick lies in how generalized statements can feel tailored to an individual, especially when we want to believe them. It's a cousin to the Forer effect, where people accept vague personality feedback as accurate. But while the Forer effect involves passive acceptance, the Barnum effect highlights how these statements are deliberately designed to sound personal. Astrologers, fortune tellers, and even some personality quizzes take advantage of this. They use cleverly worded phrases that resonate with almost everyone, giving the impression of deep understanding. The effectiveness of the Barnum effect comes from our brain's natural urge to find meaning. When someone offers insight into who we are, we instinctively try to connect the dots, sometimes ignoring the pieces that don't quite align. It's why horoscopes can feel accurate, why psychics seem to know things, and why that BuzzFeed quiz knows what type of bread you are. But here's the twist. Once you're aware of this mental sleight of hand, you'll start noticing it all over the place. Next time you're impressed by how well a description matches you, take a step back and ask, was it truly personal? Or just a cleverly placed reflection of what I wanted to believe? Understanding recency bias. That feeling at the end? That's recency bias at play. Recency bias is a mental shortcut where we place extra importance on what just happened, often ignoring the broader context. It's the reason why a rough day at work can suddenly make you question your entire job satisfaction, even after months of progress. It's why investors often panic sell during sudden market drops, forgetting the years of consistent gains beforehand. Our minds are built to favor the most current information, even when it leads us away from logical decisions. This mental glitch doesn't just shape our emotions, it influences how we choose, how we judge, and what we remember. Think of students cramming the night before an exam. They might feel confident because everything they studied is top of mind. But when it comes to material covered weeks earlier, it's often a blur. Politicians, too, know how to exploit this bias, timing announcements or controversies so the public only remembers the freshest headline when it matters most. The danger of recency bias is that it warps our perception. One recent moment shouldn't define an entire journey, yet that's exactly what our brain tries to do. To fight back against it, pause and ask yourself, am I evaluating the entire story or just reacting to the final chapter? Because sometimes, what sticks in our memory isn't what mattered most. It's just what shouted the loudest. How the primacy effect shapes us. It's the first day of class. You meet your new teacher, and in a matter of seconds, you've already made a judgment. Maybe they greeted you with a warm smile and you immediately felt at ease. Or maybe their serious expression made you think their class would be a nightmare. Weeks go by, and even if their attitude softens or changes completely, that initial impression still lingers in your mind. That's the primacy effect in action. This cognitive bias causes us to give extra weight to the very first piece of information we receive. And often, that first input shapes how we continue to think or feel long term. It's the reason first impressions carry so much weight in job interviews, on first dates, even when we're watching a commercial. If a brand introduces itself with a catchy tagline or a powerful message, that early impact sticks with you. Even if your later experiences with the brand aren't as great, that original impression continues to influence your view. But this doesn't only apply to people or products, it affects how we absorb and retain information too. Imagine being handed a long list of words and asked to remember as many as possible. Research consistently shows that the first few words are the ones you're most likely to recall. That's because your brain naturally treats the earliest input as more important, almost like it's laying the groundwork for what follows. This mental shortcut can be both helpful and harmful. On one hand, it allows us to make quick assessments and decisions. On the other hand, it can lock us into early judgments that are hard to shake, even when they turn out to be inaccurate. If your first impression of someone is that they're untrustworthy, it becomes difficult to reverse that belief, even if they later prove to be honest and dependable. So the next time you find yourself holding tightly to a first impression, stop and ask yourself, am I looking at the complete picture, or just relying on what my brain decided to remember first? Because while what comes first might feel the most important, it isn't always what truly matters. Why the strange stuff sticks. Picture this. You're scanning through a long grocery list: apples, bread, milk, eggs, octopus, rice, cheese, cereal. Wait, octopus? That one jumps out at you, doesn't it? Even if you forget most of the other items, that unusual word is the one you'll likely recall. That's the von Riestorff effect in motion, also called the isolation effect. It's a psychological phenomenon where our brains cling to things that break from the norm. When something stands out, whether it's strange, bold, or completely unexpected, it grabs our attention and sticks in our memory. That's why a neon pink sticky note on a board full of white ones instantly draws your eye. Or why someone wearing a costume in a crowd of suits leaves a lasting impression. Our brains are designed to highlight the outliers. They break the pattern, so we pay attention. Marketers use this brain quirk all the time. A quirky ad, a weird product name, or an oddly shaped bottle makes a brand more memorable and sometimes even more likable. Highlighters? They exist for this exact reason, to make important details stand out so you can recall them later. But this effect doesn't just shape what we remember, it colors how we interpret experiences. Say your entire year was mostly average, but you had one painfully awkward moment at a party. That single moment might dominate your memory of the whole year. It works with people too. One grand act of generosity or one shockingly rude comment can eclipse everything else they've ever done. Suddenly, they're either a saint or a villain in your eyes, all because of that one standout moment. So if you're trying to remember something crucial, make it pop. Use bright colors, weird humor, or a bit of absurdity. Because in a world filled with repetition, it's the odd, the bold, and the unexpected that leave a lasting mark. The misinformation effect. Imagine someone turns to you and asks, "Did you notice all the broken glass?" You pause. No, you don't remember any. But suddenly, the image of shattered glass creeps into your memory. The strange part? There was never any glass to begin with. That's the misinformation effect in full swing. This psychological phenomenon happens when inaccurate or misleading information reshapes the way we remember something. Our memories aren't flawless recordings, they're more like evolving stories, rewritten a little each time we revisit them. And when new, even incorrect details get introduced, they can blend seamlessly into the original memory, making us believe in things that never really occurred. Research on the misinformation effect shows just how vulnerable our memories truly are. In one classic study, participants were shown a video of a car crash. Later, they were asked, how fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other? A second group got the same question, but with the word hit instead of smash. The group who heard smash estimated much higher speeds, and many even recalled seeing broken glass, which wasn't in the video at all. Just a single word change shifted their entire perception of the scene. This cognitive bias has serious implications, particularly in legal settings. Eyewitnesses can unknowingly form distorted memories based on how questions are asked, news reports they see afterward, or conversations with others. There have been real cases where people were wrongfully convicted, all because of fabricated memories that felt completely real. But the impact of the misinformation effect isn't limited to courtrooms. It can alter how we view history, change how we remember personal experiences, and even influence our political beliefs. The more often we hear or repeat incorrect information, the more likely we are to accept it as fact. So the next time you think back on something and feel certain it happened a specific way, pause and ask, is this truly what occurred? Or is it just what I think I remember? Because the gap between reality and memory might be larger than we realize. The illusion of false memory. You vividly recall an event, the colors, the feelings, the faces around you. It's clear in your mind. But when you go searching for proof, you come up empty. There's no evidence it ever happened. No, this isn't a sci-fi glitch. It's a phenomenon known as false memory syndrome. False memory syndrome refers to the formation of strong, detailed memories of events that never actually took place. These aren't tiny errors like forgetting the date or misplacing a face. These are entire fabricated experiences that feel completely authentic. This strange mental error can be shaped by many factors: the power of suggestion, repeated stories, or even external influences like media exposure or therapeutic techniques. What makes this phenomenon especially eerie is how effortlessly it can be created. In one striking experiment, researchers showed people doctored photos from their childhood, placing them in a hot air balloon, an experience they never actually had. After seeing the image a few times, many participants began to recall the event in detail, describing the sensation of the breeze, the excitement of being high above the ground. Their brains had crafted an entire memory out of a manipulated image. And the consequences? They can be devastating. In the 1980s and 1990s, a wave of recovered childhood abuse memories surfaced, many during therapy sessions. Over time, a number of these memories were proven false, unintentionally implanted through suggestive questioning and repeated reinforcement. The fallout included broken families, wrongful incarcerations, and lasting emotional trauma, all from memories that felt real but weren't. False memory syndrome reveals an unsettling fact. Our memories aren't carved in stone. They shift. They bend. They're shaped by how we retell them, the people we trust, and even the language used around us. So the next time you're absolutely certain about something from your past, stop and consider. Do you truly remember it, or do you just believe you do? The expert's blind spot. You try to explain something. Maybe it's simple to you, but the other person just doesn't get it. You're baffled. It seems so obvious, so easy. But to them, It's like you're speaking in code. That irritation you feel? It's not their fault. It's a psychological trap called the curse of knowledge. This mental bias occurs when someone who understands something deeply struggles to grasp what it's like not to understand it. The moment you gain mastery, whether it's in science, coding, or even a board game, you start to lose touch with what it felt like to be a beginner. What feels effortless to you now can seem confusing or overwhelming to someone just starting out. A well-known study perfectly demonstrates this concept. Researchers had one group tap out the rhythm of a well-known song, like Happy Birthday, on a table. Meanwhile, another group tried to identify the tune. The tappers were confident, of course the others would guess it. After all, they could hear the melody clearly in their minds. But the listeners, without that internal soundtrack, almost never guessed correctly. The tappers were blinded by their own familiarity. They couldn't imagine what it was like to hear just a string of meaningless taps. This bias shows up everywhere. Teachers often struggle to simplify complex material because they forget what it's like to know nothing. Managers issue vague directions, assuming their teams can read their minds. Even in close relationships, people expect their partners to just know what they're thinking without ever saying it out loud. Escaping the curse of knowledge takes conscious effort. You have to slow down, break things into smaller, clearer pieces, and most importantly, try to remember how things looked before you understood them. Because the more you know, the harder it becomes to imagine what it's like not to know, and that invisible gap can be the biggest obstacle of all. The Pareidolia Phenomenon. You're alone at night. You glance toward a tree and freeze. Is that a face? Your pulse races, breath quickens. But when you look again, it's just a twist in the bark. What you just experienced is pareidolia, the brain's natural habit of spotting familiar shapes, especially faces, in random patterns. It's the same reason we see bunnies in clouds, a man gazing from the moon's surface, or even religious figures in burnt toast. Our brains are built to bring order to chaos. When faced with incomplete or ambiguous visuals, the mind fills in the blanks, often with things it already knows. And since faces are some of the most recognizable and emotionally charged images, they're often the first thing we project. But pareidolia isn't just a quirky trick of perception, it's deeply rooted in human survival. Early humans had to rapidly recognize faces to determine if someone was an ally, an enemy, or a predator waiting in the shadows. If you mistook a bush for a lion, you got scared. But if you mistook a lion for a bush, you didn't survive. That evolutionary urgency for false positives stuck with us. It's why we still notice eyes in inanimate objects or imagine secret messages in reversed audio. And it doesn't stop at just faces. Entire ideologies and cultural beliefs have been shaped by pareidolia. People have sworn they've seen divine figures in food, spirits in hazy photographs, or alien ships disguised in cloud patterns. The brain needs to find meaning, even when there's none. Once you become aware of pareidolia, you'll start spotting it everywhere. A coffee stain might look like a horse. A chipped tile might resemble a screaming face. A random smudge suddenly becomes something familiar. It's a powerful reminder. Reality isn't only what's in front of our eyes. It's what our minds decide to make of it. And sometimes, our minds are a little too eager to find sense in the senseless. The Apophenia Illusion. Flip a coin. Heads again, heads, then again, heads, and again, still heads. It starts to feel eerie, like the universe is whispering a message. Maybe the coin is tampered with. Maybe it's fate. Or maybe it's just pure, chaotic randomness. What you're experiencing is apophenia, the brain's deep-rooted urge to detect patterns and create connections in meaningless noise. It's why we think song lyrics are speaking directly to us, why we tie unrelated incidents into conspiracy theories, and why we interpret coincidences as cosmic signs. Our minds are meaning-making machines. They're designed to search for structure, even when none exists. This pattern-finding ability once served our ancestors well. If a rustle in the grass often meant a predator was nearby, noticing that pattern might mean the difference between survival and death. But in today's world, that survival instinct often backfires. Now, we see smiling faces in sandwiches, think two unlucky events in a row are a bad omen, or believe a certain pair of socks decides the outcome of a game. Apophenia fuels industries built on belief. Casinos, fortune tellers, and psychics all benefit from our desire to see streaks, lucky symbols, or hidden meanings behind everyday chance. One of the most well-known examples of apophenia is the Bible code theory, a belief that encoded prophecies were hidden in sacred texts, predicting real-world events. But when the same decoding method was applied to Moby Dick, it predicted assassinations too. The supposed revelations weren't divine. They were coincidences wearing a clever disguise. Our brains are powerful tools, but they're not flawless. Recognizing apophenia helps us step back and ask, is this connection real? Or is it just my mind drawing lines between us that were never supposed to be joined? Next time you catch a strange synchronicity or feel like the universe is trying to send you a message, pause. Is it meaningful? Or is it just your brain doing what it's always done, finding patterns in the randomness? When our brains connect the unconnected, ever notice how it always seems to pour the one time you forget your umbrella? But on days you remember to bring it, not a single drop. It feels like the weather is in on some cosmic joke. But really, this is an example of illusory correlation when our minds create a link between two unrelated things. We're wired to spot patterns, even when none exist. It's a mental shortcut that helps us make sense of the world. But sometimes, it leads us astray. Take the full moon myth. Many believe that strange things happen when the moon is bright, emergencies spike, animals act up, and people get weird. Yet research shows no measurable rise in odd behavior during full moons. So why does this belief hang around? Because when something bizarre happens on a full moon, it sticks in our memory. When it happens on any other night, we shrug it off. Our brains cling to examples that support what we already suspect and quietly ignore the ones that don't. We're filtering reality without even realizing it. These mental misfires don't just fuel folklore, they shape stereotypes and flawed judgments. Imagine meeting two rude people from the same town. Suddenly, your brain forms a shortcut. People from that place must be rude. But the truth is, those two were just jerks, not representatives of an entire population. Still, the idea sticks, and over time, every negative encounter adds fuel to that false fire. That's confirmation bias feeding an illusion born from a false connection. Recognizing illusory correlation helps us think sharper and judge more fairly. So next time you catch yourself saying, "This always happens when," stop and ask, is there really a connection? Or am I just noticing what fits my belief and tuning out the rest? Because often, it's not the universe pulling the strings, it's just your brain playing tricks behind the scenes. How we misremember what matters most. You got sick. Now you're retracing your steps. Do you clearly recall what you ate just before it happened? Chances are, one particular meal comes to mind, and suddenly it feels suspicious. Maybe it was that sushi from the new place or the sandwich that tasted a bit off. But was it truly the cause? Or is your mind just connecting dots that fit the story? That's recall bias in action, our brain's tendency to highlight certain memories while ignoring or reshaping others, especially when they match the explanation we're searching for. It's a mental shortcut that favors meaning over accuracy. Think about how we reflect on past events. We rarely remember the full, messy truth. Instead, we focus on the pieces that felt the strongest, emotionally or narratively. In science, this becomes a big problem. In medical studies, patients are often asked to recall their habits. Someone diagnosed with lung cancer might suddenly remember smoking more than they actually did, convinced it must have played a role. Meanwhile, A healthy individual might downplay how often they smoke. These warped recollections can distort data, leading researchers and doctors toward the wrong conclusions. But recall bias isn't limited to labs and studies, it's everywhere. At a bad breakup, you might now focus only on the warning signs, conveniently forgetting all the good memories you once treasured. Want a tough game? You'll likely recall your clutch moves, not the lucky bounce that gave you the edge. That's because our memories don't function like recordings. They work like stories, revised to match what we feel or believe in hindsight. The tricky part? We trust those memories, even when they're clearly flawed. So next time a memory feels suspiciously clear or perfectly fitting, pause and reflect. Is this truly how it happened? Or just how my brain wants it to be remembered? Because the past we recall isn't always the past that was. Sometimes, it's just a version rewritten for comfort, clarity, or closure. When big changes go unnoticed, you're deep in a chat with a friend when the server comes by, jots down your order, and walks off. A few minutes later, someone else drops off your food, but you don't even realize it's a different person. Sounds like a trick? It's not. This is change blindness, a quirky flaw in how our minds work, where we miss obvious changes happening right before us. Although we like to believe we notice everything around us, our minds actually filter out a lot. Rather than absorb every little detail, our brains aim for speed and simplicity, grabbing the essence of the moment, not every pixel of it. Researchers have explored this oddity in creative ways. In one clever experiment, participants were shown two very similar pictures that alternated quickly, with a brief flash of a blank screen between them. Despite big differences, like a vanishing item or a shift in color, it took many people quite a while to spot what had changed. Without focused attention, even obvious differences can go undetected. But this isn't just a lab curiosity, it happens all around us. Magicians rely on it to make things disappear in front of your eyes. Drivers may overlook a nearby motorcyclist simply because their attention is elsewhere. Even eyewitness accounts can be skewed. Someone may insist everything stayed the same, even though a key element was altered. The most unsettling part? Change blindness gives us false confidence. We feel like we're observing everything, when in fact, our awareness is filled with blind spots. So the next time you step into a room you know well, pause for a second. That photo on the wall, the lamp on the table, are they truly where you remember them being? Or has something quietly shifted without you even noticing? When focus makes us blind, you're watching a video of people tossing a basketball back and forth. Your task: count how many times the players in white uniforms pass the ball. You concentrate, eyes locked on the movement, tallying each throw carefully. Later, you're asked for your count. You answer confidently and correctly. Then comes the twist. Did you catch the gorilla? Gorilla? What gorilla? This strange moment is a classic example of inattentional blindness, a mental glitch where we completely miss something right in front of us because our attention is tied up elsewhere. In the legendary Invisible Gorilla study, participants were so focused on tracking the ball that nearly half didn't notice a person in a full gorilla costume casually strolling through the scene, stopping to thump their chest. It seems impossible. How could anyone overlook that? But it's surprisingly common in everyday life. Ever searched your entire room for your phone while holding it? Or driven right past an exit while thinking about work? That's inattentional blindness in action. Our minds are designed to filter out what seems irrelevant, spotlighting only what we think matters at the time. But this shortcut can be risky. Pilots have missed blinking caution signs. Doctors have overlooked critical markers on scans. Drivers often fail to register pedestrians or bikes simply because they weren't looking for them. What's most unsettling? We don't just ignore things. We don't even realize we ignored them. So, think about today. That message you claim never arrived. The friend's new haircut you didn't mention. That key detail you overlooked when making a choice. The world hides in plain sight, not because it's invisible, but because your brain quietly decided not to look. When decisions aren't really yours, picture this. You're taking part in a psychology study. You're shown two photos of strangers and asked to select the one you find more attractive. Seems easy enough. You make your selection. The researcher then hands you the image you supposedly picked and asks why you found this individual more appealing. But here's the twist. They've secretly swapped your choice. You've actually been given the other photo, the one you didn't choose. And yet, without a second thought, you begin describing exactly why this was your preferred option. Welcome to the world of choice blindness, a curious mental blind spot where people fail to recognize when their original decisions are altered, and even confidently justify a choice they never truly made. This effect has been tested across all kinds of domains, from consumer preferences to political opinions. In various studies, people have offered detailed explanations for food flavors they didn't pick, products they didn't select, and stances they never originally supported. Why does this happen? Our minds crave consistency. We like to see ourselves as in control, making intentional, well thought out choices. So when reality contradicts that belief, our brain quietly edits the story, often without us even realizing it. Instead of acknowledging the mix up, we create a believable explanation after the fact. Think about how this plays out in real life. Ever backed up a decision only to later realize you don't remember why you made it in the first place? Ever assumed you picked something and just went along with it, even though it might not have been your actual choice? Choice blindness reveals something profound. Our confidence in our decisions might not be as solid as we think. If it's this easy to misattribute a simple selection, how many of our past beliefs, preferences, and decisions are just retroactive stories we've told ourselves? The illusion of certainty. Think you can always tell when someone's lying? Maybe you'd bet on being right 80% or even 90% of the time? You're not alone. Most people believe they're great lie detectors. But the reality? Research reveals that the average person's accuracy barely beats chance, hovering around 54%. That's the illusion of certainty in action, better known as the overconfidence effect. It's a psychological quirk where individuals routinely overrate their skills, knowledge, or decision-making abilities. It's why nearly every driver thinks they're better than most. Why students expect higher grades than they actually earn, and why people make bold financial calls with unwarranted conviction. This bias isn't just harmless, it can be dangerous. Physicians may display unwarranted confidence in a diagnosis, leading to incorrect treatment. Traders and investors might gamble on markets with misplaced certainty, resulting in major losses. In one well-known study, participants answered trivia questions and then ranked how sure they were about their responses. Even when people claimed 100% confidence, they were wrong nearly 40% of the time. So, why does this happen? Our brains don't like ambiguity. Being confident feels reassuring. It offers a sense of control and clarity. Admitting uncertainty feels uncomfortable, so instead, we convince ourselves we're right, even when the facts say otherwise. Ironically, the people who know the least often feel the most sure of themselves, a bias known as the Dunning-Kruger effect. Meanwhile, true experts, aware of complexity and nuance, tend to express more hesitation, not less. Next time you find yourself absolutely sure about something, hit pause. Are you certain because you know, or because it just feels good to be sure? Sometimes, the wisest move isn't to defend our beliefs, but to recognize the possibility that we might be wrong. The echo chamber illusion. You're out to eat with friends, and half-jokingly, declare that putting pineapple on pizza should be a crime. Naturally, you expect everyone to agree, because obviously, that's the right take. But then someone gasps and passionately defends it as a flawless sweet-meat savory combo. You're stunned. How could anyone not see things your way? That surprise you're feeling? That's thanks to the echo chamber illusion. also known as the false consensus effect. It's the mental shortcut that makes us believe our own opinions, habits, and preferences are far more widely shared than they really are. We assume what makes sense to us must make sense to most people. There are a few key reasons our minds work this way. First, we tend to hang out with people who think like us. When your circle all shares your taste in music, politics, or humor, it reinforces the illusion that your views are the mainstream. Second, we're naturally self-centered, not in a selfish way, but in how we perceive the world. We default to thinking our perspective is the standard human one. And third, it's uncomfortable to realize how wildly different others' worldviews can be, so our brains just kind of ignore that. This bias can cause more than awkward pizza debates. It fuels overconfidence in debates and political discussions, where people believe their side is the obvious majority. It leads companies to wrongly assume customers will love a product just because they do. And it even adds tension to social or cultural disputes, where both sides believe they're speaking for everyone, when really, the room is far more split. So next time you're absolutely convinced your opinion is universal, hit pause. Is it really the common view? Or is your brain reflecting back a version of the world that just happens to match your own? Recognizing the echo chamber illusion won't settle the pineapple on pizza battle, but it might help explain why that argument never seems to end. The credit-claiming reflex. You ace a test and instantly think, of course, I studied hard. I'm naturally great at this. But if you bomb it, suddenly, the test was unfair, the questions were confusing, or maybe you just weren't feeling your best. See the pattern? When things go right, we pat ourselves on the back. When they go wrong, we shift the blame. This is known as the credit-claiming reflex, or more formally, the self-serving bias. It's a mental defense mechanism that shields our ego. We love to believe that all our wins come from talent and effort, while our failures are due to things beyond our control. This belief helps us feel capable and secure, but it often bends the truth. Take athletes, for instance. When they win, it's because of skill, strategy, and training. But a loss must have been the weather, or the refs, or just plain bad luck. In the workplace, people happily accept praise for team successes. But when projects flop, it's the toxic culture or poor leadership at fault. Even in personal relationships, we tend to think we're the logical one, and the other person is being difficult or irrational. This bias isn't just about inflating our self-image. It actively shapes how we interpret the world. It can block us from growing because we don't recognize our own mistakes. It can escalate arguments because both sides feel completely justified. And it can keep us stuck in patterns because it's hard to fix what we refuse to own. The tricky part? It's incredibly hard to spot in ourselves. Why? Because deep down, we assume we're the ones seeing things clearly. So next time you succeed, try asking, did anything outside of me contribute to that win? And when you fall short, ask yourself, was it really just bad luck? Or could I have done something differently? How you answer might reveal more about your inner mindset than the actual situation itself. The bright side trap. You delay cracking open a book, convinced you'll still crush the exam. You light up another cigarette, certain that serious illness happens to other people. This isn't just naive hope, it's the bright side trap, better known as optimism bias. It's a cognitive shortcut that tricks us into believing that we're less likely than others to face misfortune. It's why people say, it won't happen to me, even when the stats clearly say it might. It's the belief that your marriage will go the distance, despite rising divorce rates. It's the gambler who's sure the next spin will hit the jackpot. It's the entrepreneur who bets the farm, thinking their startup will be the exception, despite the odds. At first, this kind of thinking seems irrational, maybe even dangerous. After all, underestimating risk sounds like a recipe for disaster. But the story isn't that simple. Surprisingly, optimism bias can also fuel ambition. If people truly grasped how many hurdles, rejections, and setbacks come with chasing big dreams, writing a novel, launching a business, creating something new, many would never even start. Optimism can act as rocket fuel. It gives us the nerve to take chances, to persist, to believe in outcomes that reason alone might dismiss. Still, unchecked positivity has its pitfalls. It blinds us to warning signs, encourages procrastination, and leads us to downplay real challenges. We assume there'll always be more time, more luck, more opportunities, until reality catches up. The solution? Not to give up hope, but to pair it with preparation. Dream big, absolutely, but double check your parachute. Plan for obstacles even as you reach for the stars. Because sometimes, thinking everything will magically work out is exactly what keeps it from happening. Always expecting rain. Just because there are clouds on the horizon doesn't mean a storm is coming. But try convincing your brain of that. When we're faced with the unknown, many of us instinctively brace for disaster, convinced that if something can go wrong, it probably will. This is called pessimism bias, a mental habit where we overestimate negative outcomes, even when the facts don't support that level of worry. Picture two people applying for the same position. One sends off their RSUM, feeling cautiously hopeful. The other hesitates, assuming rejection is inevitable. Maybe they delay hitting send, or they write a weak, rushed cover letter. When the rejection finally lands in their inbox, they think, see, I knew it. But was it destiny? Or did their doubt help shape the result? Pessimism bias twists our view of reality. A single bad moment, a breakup, a money mistake, a public misstep, can overshadow dozens of positive ones. It's why people fear plane crashes more than car accidents, even though the data says flying is far safer. It's why some avoid investing altogether, convinced a financial meltdown is just around the corner. It's why one rude comment can echo in your mind for years, while praise disappears in seconds. Ironically, pessimism feels like protection. Expect the worst, and you think you'll never be disappointed. But in truth, it causes you to hold back, avoid risks, and carry stress you don't need. Yes, the future is uncertain. Sometimes it will hurt, but often it won't. The real challenge is understanding that always preparing for disaster doesn't make you smart. It just might stop you from experiencing all the good that's waiting on the other side of your fear. But one of us effect, you're at a gathering where most faces are unfamiliar. Then, from across the room, you overhear someone mention your favorite sports team, your hometown, or maybe even a hobby you're passionate about. Suddenly, they feel familiar, like someone you get. You're drawn to them instantly, ready to listen, agree, and connect. Now flip the situation. Someone else at the same event starts talking, but they're a fan of your team's biggest rival, or they express an opposing viewpoint. Before they even finish speaking, you feel yourself pulling away, doubtful, uneasy, even guarded. Why does this happen? Because your brain naturally leans toward people who feel like they're in your circle and instinctively keeps distance from those who don't. This mental shortcut is called in-group bias, a built-in tendency to favor those we see as part of our group, while being less generous, or even cold, to those we see as outsiders. It's an old instinct. Back in prehistoric times, sticking close to your tribe meant survival, while strangers could pose a risk. Even today, we form these psychological tribes without even realizing it, sometimes over deep things like nationality or beliefs, but also over surface level stuff like our favorite drink or a shared TV show. In-group bias shows up everywhere. In politics, it fuels division, where people defend their party at all costs. In offices, it creates favoritism, with leaders often promoting people who remind them of themselves. Even in customer service, studies reveal people are more likely to help those they subconsciously view as like them. And here's the twist. Most of us have no clue we're doing it. To move past in-group bias, we have to deliberately pause and question it. So next time you're quick to reject someone's point of view, ask yourself, is it their idea I disagree with, or just the fact that they feel like they're not on my team? The more we challenge these snap judgments, the closer we get to thinking beyond our built and mental boundaries. They're all the same illusion. At first glance, people from groups we don't belong to seem almost identical. Students from a rival school appear to dress alike. An older generation seems to share the same outlook. A different culture? It often feels like everyone in it thinks the same way. But when we look at our group, the differences are obvious. Everyone stands out, different personalities, unique views, distinct habits. That contrast is the result of something called out group homogeneity bias, a mental shortcut that makes us see those outside our circle as more similar to each other than they really are, while noticing all the diversity within our own group. Picture a movie. The villains belong to one organization. They're usually portrayed like clones, identical motives, no nuance. Now, think about the heroes. They've got layered backstories, different personalities, individual choices. This same mental filter plays out in the real world. Someone who loves rock might say, all country songs sound the same, while spotting subtle differences in their own favorite tracks. People from one town might assume everyone in another has the same attitude, even when that's clearly not the case. The problem? This bias feeds stereotypes and oversimplifications. When we treat outsiders as a uniform group, it becomes easier to form unfair judgments, hold prejudices, or even justify conflict. Research shows this cognitive bias exists across societies. It affects how we perceive everything from race and politics to nationalities and even company departments. And here's the kicker. You are someone else's outgroup. The group you see as them, they might see you the same way, just another face in the crowd. But this bias isn't permanent. The more we engage with people outside our usual circles, the more we realize just how individual and multifaceted they really are. Because the world isn't split into neat teams of us and them. It's a sprawling mosaic of real people, each with their own story, trying to make sense of life just like you. The weight of expectations. A study points out that boys often outperform girls in math. Almost instantly, some of the girls in the classroom grow anxious. They begin to doubt their responses, hesitate more, and feel less sure of themselves. And even though they're just as skilled, their performance dips. What you're seeing here is stereotype threat in motion, a mental effect where individuals do worse when they're reminded of a negative stereotype about their identity. And this isn't limited to just gender or math. Anyone can be affected. A student from a less affluent background might hear that wealthier kids usually score higher and suddenly feel out of place. An older employee might hear that younger people are better with tech and then fumble through a software update they'd normally manage with ease. Even seasoned athletes can be thrown off. If they're reminded of a stereotype tied to their race or nationality, their performance can take a hit. It's not about talent, it's about mental pressure. When someone becomes aware of a stereotype that targets their group, they begin to fear living up to that label. That fear creates stress. Stress makes it harder to concentrate, turning even simple tasks into uphill battles. Experiments have proven that just mentioning a stereotype before a test can lower someone's performance. But remove that reminder, people often perform the way they actually should, at their real level of ability. The impact of stereotype threat extends far beyond test scores. It discourages bright individuals from chasing certain paths, deepens social divides, and reinforces false beliefs that were never true to begin with. Ironically, it makes stereotypes appear real by pressuring people into underperforming. But here's the hopeful part. Just knowing about this bias gives people power over it. When individuals understand the invisible weight they've been carrying, they can learn to set it down. No stereotype, no expectation, No label defines what someone can truly achieve. The confidence illusion. A contestant struts onto the stage, radiating self-assurance. He launches into a song, completely off-key, unaware of the judge's strained expressions. When they bluntly tell him he's not good, he appears stunned. How could they not recognize his brilliance? This moment, equal parts awkward and intriguing, captures the essence of the Dunning-Kruger effect, a mental bias where people lacking skill in a certain area mistakenly assume they're far more capable than they really are. The root of this bias? When you don't know much, you don't know enough to realize just how little you know. Picture someone who's just picked up a guitar and learned a few chords. To them, stardom feels right around the corner. But a seasoned guitarist understands the depth of technique, theory, and years of disciplined practice ahead. Ironically, as people gain more knowledge, their confidence can actually shrink, at least temporarily, because they become more aware of the complexity and nuance within their craft. That's the paradox. Novices often overestimate themselves, while true experts sometimes second-guess their own understanding. It's why someone who watched a handful of finance tutorials might believe they've cracked the stock market, while a seasoned economist knows that true prediction is near impossible. This bias isn't just amusing, it has real-world consequences. Cocky drivers may make reckless choices. Inexperienced leaders may steer entire teams or countries in the wrong direction. And misinformation spreads fastest when people are absolutely sure they're right, without actually knowing much at all. The remedy? Intellectual humility. A willingness to say, I might be wrong. True intelligence isn't claiming to have all the answers. It's recognizing the vast ocean of things still left to understand. The illusion of being better. In a surprising survey, around 80% of drivers claimed they were better than most others on the road. Logically, that can't be true. By definition, only half can be above average. But this isn't just a driving thing. People often assume they're more intelligent, more talented, and even more generous than those around them. This mental distortion is called the Lake Wobegon effect, a psychological bias where people believe they're superior to the average person. It's named after a fictional town where, humorously, all the children are above average. That idea captures the essence of this bias. We see ourselves as exceptional, even when we're not. It explains why students are often overly optimistic about their test results, why most workers think they outperform their colleagues, and why just about everyone believes they're funnier than the next person. This bias thrives on two mental habits: selective memory and self-flattering comparisons. We tend to recall our victories more clearly than our stumbles, so we feel more capable than we truly are. And when comparing ourselves to others, we often focus on their weakest traits while seeing ourselves in the best possible light. While this bias can give our confidence a boost, helping us take risks or stay motivated, it also has a downside. It can lead to inflated egos, bad decisions, and a resistance to feedback or growth. After all, if you believe you're already better than average, why try to improve? But here's the truth. Being average isn't a flaw. It's a statistical fact. What matters isn't whether you're above the middle. It's whether you're willing to climb higher. Self-awareness starts with honesty, even when it's a little uncomfortable. The superiority illusion. Pose a question to a crowd. Are you a better driver than most? Chances are most hands will go up. Ask the same about intelligence. And again, you'll hear confident yes from nearly everyone. Kindness, honesty, likability. Across the board, people tend to rank themselves above average. But here's the catch. Mathematically, only half can be better than the midpoint. Still, the superiority illusion convinces us otherwise. It's a common psychological bias where individuals believe they outperform others in a wide range of areas. This mental glitch is fueled by a mix of pride and selective recollection. When judging ourselves, We spotlight our best performances and quietly ignore the times we messed up. A person who accidentally swerves in traffic might shrug it off as a rare slip, yet recall every careless driver they've ever seen as evidence of their own superiority behind the wheel. This bias thrives in situations where ability is vague or subjective. Take humor, for example. Many people are sure they're hilarious, but what actually defines a good sense of humor? Without a clear standard, we exaggerate our strengths and brush off our flaws. A little self-assurance isn't necessarily bad. It can boost motivation and help us stay positive. But too much of this illusion can backfire. Overconfidence leads students to underprepare, investors to make reckless moves, and people to take on challenges they're not ready for. Ironically, those who are truly skilled often experience less of this bias. They're more aware of how much they still have to learn, while those stuck in the illusion of superiority may never take the steps needed to actually grow. So maybe the real path to being better than most starts with accepting that you're probably not, and using that as fuel to actually improve. The underdog illusion. Imagine someone hands you a Rubik's Cube. Right away, you think, no chance, I'd be terrible at this. Your mind jumps to those lightning-fast solvers spinning it in seconds. Or maybe you're asked to parallel park with people watching. Suddenly, you feel like the most unskilled driver on earth. But here's the catch. You might actually be far more capable than you give yourself credit for. This is called the underdog illusion, a cognitive bias that leads us to downplay our own competence, especially in tasks we view as demanding or elite. Unlike the better than average effect, which pumps up our self-belief, this one deflates it, often without any real evidence. The effect hits hardest in areas where skill looks exclusive or glamorous. Think about advanced piano playing, solving complex equations, or delivering a speech. When we picture those talents, we focus on the pros, the ones who shine. The average folks, they fade into the background. We forget they even exist. That mental spotlight creates a warped view. We assume we're alone in our inadequacy, when in truth we may be sitting comfortably in the middle of the curve. Ironically, this belief can stop us before we start. Someone who's convinced they're hopeless at chess never picks up the board. Another who fears they can't dance avoids every party floor. By believing we're not good enough, we rob ourselves of the chance to get better. The reality? Most people aren't prodigies or disasters. We're simply average, and that's perfectly okay. In a world where doubt can be just as deceptive as arrogance, the biggest error might be assuming you're worse than you truly are. When expectations build reality, a student walks into a math exam already certain they're going to bomb it. They skip reviewing their answers, overthink the simple problems, and barely make an effort on the tough ones. When the score comes back low, it only seems to confirm their suspicion. I've never been good at math. But was the failure pre-written? Or did their mindset quietly shape the result? This mental phenomenon functions like a feedback loop. Your assumptions tweak your behavior impacts your outcome, and that outcome circles back to reinforce your assumptions. It shows up in all kinds of situations. Consider a teacher who expects certain students to do well, maybe without even realizing it. They offer those students extra encouragement, attention, or patience. Those kids flourish under the spotlight. Meanwhile, students who are expected to fall behind might receive fewer chances, less warmth, and over time, that gap becomes very real. It's not just about classrooms either. Someone who believes they're terrible at socializing might avoid eye contact, keep their replies short, and shy away from conversation. Other people notice the awkwardness and react with less interest, which only makes the person feel even more isolated. Ironically, confidence, genuine or not, tends to be self-reinforcing. Sometimes just believing you'll succeed can help you act in ways that lead to success. The tricky part? These loops usually fly under the radar. We assume results are proof of what we already believed, not realizing our beliefs helped create them. But that's the power of this effect. If negative expectations can drag us down, positive ones can lift us up just the same. The real question isn't just what you expect, it's whether your expectations are quietly writing your reality. The bias behind convenient evidence. Drop 10 pounds in just 1 week. An eye-catching headline swears by a study where people who ate grapefruit daily shed weight. Sounds legit until you notice the fine print. No mention of exercise, calorie control, or other critical variables. Other research that showed no clear weight loss? Quietly pushed aside. This mental trap is called selective spotlighting, the tendency to focus only on information that supports a preferred belief, while ignoring data that might challenge it. It's not just in the world of fad diets. You'll see it in politics, where leaders flaunt favorable numbers and sidestep the inconvenient ones. It shows up in marketing, where companies showcase glowing testimonials and quietly omit the critical reviews. Even in casual debates, people recall facts that back their stance, while conveniently forgetting anything that doesn't. Why does it work so well? Because it feels like evidence. When we're shown a curated list of facts, especially ones that align with our opinions, it's easy to believe we're seeing the full picture. But in truth, it's like assembling a jigsaw puzzle using only the pieces that match your idea. The result? A warped, incomplete version of reality. And here's the real problem. This bias builds echo chambers. When we only consume information that echoes what we already believe, our views become more rigid, more extreme, and harder to rethink. The actual truth? Buried beneath carefully selected fragments. So the next time something feels too perfectly aligned with your viewpoint, ask yourself, what am I not seeing? Because sometimes, what's missing tells you more than what's shown. When one step becomes the end of the world, if we let students use calculators in class, they'll forget basic arithmetic. Soon they won't be able to do simple math without digital help. Eventually, the entire school system will crumble, and no one will know how to add or subtract. Sounds extreme? That's because it is. But this kind of argument shows up all the time. It's called the slippery slope fallacy, the belief that one minor change will automatically set off a disastrous chain reaction. The core idea? That a small, reasonable step leads straight to catastrophe. But in most cases, there's no actual evidence that one event will inevitably cause the next. The logic leaps from step 1 to step 10, skipping all the real-world complexity in between. This fallacy pops up in nearly every type of discussion. Some say that legalizing one drug will destroy society's morals. Others argue that updating a school rule will wreck the entire education system. Even in daily life, we tell ourselves, if I miss one day at the gym, I'll get lazy, stop going entirely, and be out of shape forever. Each time, the fear is that one small action starts a snowball we can't stop. So why does this flawed logic work? Because fear is persuasive. Imagining the worst-case scenario activates our instinct to avoid risk. But here's the thing. Not every change is a landslide. Most progress happens in stages. And we always have chances to pause, rethink, and redirect. Next time you hear someone claim that a single decision will lead to total collapse, pause for a moment. Instead of asking, what if this ruins everything? Try asking, what if it doesn't? The future isn't a house of cards. It's stronger than fear makes it seem. Fighting shadows. The straw man trap. We should increase school funding. Oh, so you want to give schools a blank check and eliminate all oversight? See the issue? The first comment is reasonable, but the reply twists it into something extreme, a distorted version that's easier to attack. This is the straw man fallacy in action. Rather than confronting the real argument, this tactic reshapes it into a flimsy, exaggerated claim, one that's much easier to knock down. It's a classic move in debates, political speeches, social media spats, and even everyday disagreements. Picture this. Someone says cutting back on meat could improve your health. Instead of a thoughtful reply, they're met with, "So you want to outlaw burgers and force everyone into tofu?" Or someone supports stronger background checks for firearm purchases, only to be told, "Oh, so you want to disarm every citizen and leave us vulnerable?" That's the trick. Turn a reasonable point into a ridiculous one, then destroy the fake version. Why does it work? Because people respond faster to emotion than logic. They react to the exaggeration instead of taking time to understand the original message. Conversations break down this way. No one's listening. They're just trying to win. Want to spot it? Pay attention. If someone's reply jumps to extremes that were never mentioned, stop and ask, "Is that really what I said?" Chances are, it's not. The opponent they're arguing with. It only exists in their imagination. Real dialogue happens when both sides address what was actually said, not made up caricatures designed to be destroyed. Because arguing with a straw figure is easy, but it gets you nowhere near the truth. The Ad Hominem Shortcut. Your opinion doesn't count. You're just a college kid. Why listen to her about climate change? She's not even a scientist. Notice what's missing. Neither response actually addresses the argument itself. They go straight after the person delivering the message. This is known as the ad hominem fallacy, one of the oldest rhetorical tactics in the book. Rather than dealing with the substance of the claim, it attacks the individual behind it. You'll see this move everywhere, in political debates, comment sections, and casual disagreements. Let's say someone critiques a policy. Instead of addressing the critique, they're told they're too naive, too emotional, or too inexperienced to be taken seriously. Or a researcher presents compelling data. Rather than grappling with the findings, someone might say, "Well, they're just chasing funding. It's effective because it's a shortcut. It bypasses complexity." Instead of dissecting the logic, you undermine the source. Why does this work? Because challenging ideas takes time and effort. Casting doubt on a person is faster, simpler, and emotionally satisfying. But here's the problem. Someone you dislike can still make a solid point, and someone you admire can still be wrong. Arguments should be evaluated on their logic, their evidence, their substance, not on who's delivering them. So the next time you hear someone shift the focus from what's being said to who's saying it, pause. Ask, is this about the argument or just a personal jab in disguise? Because the moment we stop discussing ideas and start scoring points through character attacks, the goal changes from truth to victory. And real conversations don't survive that shift. When status replaces proof, at one point, a popular public figure claimed a specific vitamin could stop cancer. Sales exploded overnight. But here's the catch. He wasn't a doctor, had no scientific background, and lacked any medical training. He was simply famous, and that was enough for people to believe him. This is a classic example of the appeal to authority, a fallacy where a statement is accepted as true, not because of solid evidence, but because it comes from someone seen as influential. It could be a celebrity, a powerful executive, or someone with a prestigious title. The logic goes, if they said it, it must be right. But confidence and status don't guarantee correctness. Sure, expertise matters. A seasoned pilot will obviously understand aviation better than your neighbor. But the trouble begins when reputation outweighs reasoning. Just because someone won a Nobel Prize doesn't mean they're right about a topic outside their expertise. Just because a doctor promotes a product doesn't mean it actually works. Even well-respected experts can make mistakes or have hidden motives, like financial gain, fame, or pride. That's why it's essential to separate the speaker from the statement. If someone throws out a big name instead of real data, pause and ask, what's the actual proof here? Authority can guide us, But it should never replace critical thinking, because the moment we stop questioning and start blindly accepting, we're not moving closer to truth. We're just surrendering to influence. The silence isn't proof fallacy. Back in the mid 1900s, some scientists insisted smoking posed no health risks. Why? Because there wasn't conclusive proof linking cigarettes to lung cancer. Fast forward a few decades, mountains of research confirmed the connection. But by then, millions had paid the price for a belief rooted not in facts, but in what wasn't known. This is a textbook case of the appeal to ignorance, a flawed line of thinking where the absence of evidence is treated as evidence in itself. You'll hear it all the time. No one's proven aliens don't exist, so they must be real. Bigfoot hasn't been found, which only means he's just very good at hiding. See the issue? Not having proof isn't the same as having proof. Just because something hasn't been disproven doesn't make it true. And just because something hasn't been confirmed doesn't make it false. This kind of logic isn't just sloppy, it's dangerous. A politician might say, "There's no evidence my opponent didn't do something shady." Or a company might argue, "There's no proof our product doesn't work." In both cases, they shift the burden of proof, demanding others disprove something, instead of providing solid evidence to support it. Truth doesn't emerge from guesses made in empty spaces. It grows from acknowledging uncertainty and requiring real data before jumping to conclusions. Because when ignorance is used as a substitute for proof, we're not uncovering facts. We're just crafting convenient fictions. The illusion of either or thinking. It sounds decisive, like there's a sharp line in the sand. But what if you agree with parts of both sides? What if there's a spectrum instead of two extremes? That's the issue with false dichotomies. They take complex situations and reduce them to an either or choice, even though the truth is often far more layered. This misleading pattern shows up everywhere, from political speeches and online arguments to family conversations. Imagine a parent saying, "You either become a doctor or you're a disappointment," completely overlooking the dozens of fulfilling careers outside medicine. Or a business that insists, "Buy our product or you'll be left behind," as if there's no third option. These statements create a false sense of urgency and limited choices, one that's right and one that's wrong. But in reality, there may be many valid paths, not just the two being offered. The real danger? This mindset shrinks our ability to think critically. When people believe they have to pick a side, they stop exploring new ideas. Creative thinking gets boxed in, compromise disappears, and thoughtful discussion turns into a win or lose fight. But most decisions in life aren't binary switches. The truth often exists in shades of gray, not black or white. The real skill isn't choosing between the two extremes. It's realizing that those aren't the only paths on the map. The crowd can be wrong. You see a huge crowd outside a diner and think, "This place has to be incredible." Maybe you even decide to wait in line yourself, figuring that so many people can't all be mistaken. But here's the twist. They might be standing there for the same reason you are, just following everyone else. This is the bandwagon fallacy in action, the belief that something must be right, valuable, or true simply because it's popular. It fuels trends, viral crazes, and sudden explosions of hype over things you didn't even know existed yesterday. As more people jump on board, the illusion of legitimacy grows, even if there's no real proof behind it. History gives us plenty of warnings. In the 1600s, the Dutch tulip craze saw people bankrupt themselves over flower bulbs, thinking prices would only rise. In the early 2000s, the dot-com boom had investors pouring money into tech startups based on hype alone until it all came crashing down. In both cases, the crowd wasn't a sign of accuracy. It was a signal of mass misjudgment. But this fallacy isn't limited to financial disasters. It creeps into daily decisions. Someone might back a politician just because their friends do, without understanding their actual views. A teen might buy a trendy jacket, not because they like it, but because everyone else seems to. But popularity doesn't equal quality, and obscurity doesn't mean something's worthless. A weak idea doesn't become smart just because it's in style, and a smart idea doesn't lose power just because it's unpopular. Thinking for yourself takes effort, especially when the crowd is shouting. But the next time you feel swayed by what everyone is doing, pause and ask, do I believe in this or am I just afraid to stand alone? Because chasing the crowd may feel safe, but the truth doesn't always travel in a pack. The mistake of mixing cause with coincidence. His favorite team wins a game, and he just happens to be wearing his striped socks. Next week, he wears them again. Another victory. Now he's sure. Those socks are lucky. This is how the mind falls into the trap of post hoc ergo propter hoc, a Latin phrase meaning after this, therefore, because of this. It's the flawed logic that just because one thing came before another, it must have caused it. It's a mental shortcut we often take, but it can seriously mislead us. Superstitions thrive on this error. A student scores well on an exam using a certain pen, and suddenly that pen becomes their lucky charm. Someone eats sushi, then gets food poisoning. Now they avoid all Japanese cuisine, convinced it was the culprit. But just because two things happen around the same time doesn't mean one caused the other. The student probably studied hard. That's what earned the grade, not the pen. And the food poisoning could have been from something entirely different. This fallacy doesn't just affect personal habits, it has bigger consequences. In the past, people saw comets in the sky and blamed them for deadly plagues. More recently, a person might try a new vitamin, feel better, and assume the pill is the miracle, without thinking about sleep, diet, stress, or other factors. Sometimes cause and effect are real, but assuming a link without clear evidence can lead to completely false beliefs. So next time you notice a pattern, stop and ask, is there real proof that A caused B? Or are you just connecting that aren't actually related? Because while rituals and routines can be fun, they don't replace the real ingredients of success: effort, thought, and facts. Mistaking coincidence for causation. It's summertime, and both ice cream sales and drowning incidents are on the rise. So clearly, eating ice cream must somehow be causing more people to drown, right? Sounds absurd, but this kind of flawed thinking is surprisingly widespread. It's called cum hoc ergo propter hoc, Latin for with this, therefore because of this. It's the false assumption that if two things happen at the same time, one must be causing the other, even when there's no real connection between them. Here's the reality. Hot weather leads to more people enjoying ice cream and also encourages more swimming. With more people in the water, the risk of drowning naturally increases. But the ice cream? It's just along for the ride. It's not the cause. This kind of logical mix-up shows up everywhere. Some believe that playing violent video games leads kids to become aggressive, without considering influences like home life, social environment, or temperament. Others see studies showing that rich people are healthier and assume money itself directly creates better health. In truth, things like access to quality food, healthcare, and reduced stress are all part of the equation. The media loves this trick. One day, there's a headline saying coffee drinkers live longer. The next day, you hear that people who sleep less tend to be more productive. But are these patterns truly cause and effect, or are they simply connected by some deeper shared influence? Spotting this fallacy is an essential critical thinking skill. Just because two things appear side by side doesn't mean one is triggering the other. So when someone confidently claims that one trend is driving another, pause and ask yourself, could there be another explanation? Because at the end of the day, sometimes things just happen at the same time, and ice cream is exactly what it looks like, a sweet summer treat.